Hello, everybody. This is Jeff Schechter, aka Shecky, with the High Return Real Estate Show. And I am here with my amazing and handsome business partner, Mr. Jack Gibson. How are you, Jack?
Great, Shecky. Excited as always for this podcast.
Yeah, we have got just an unbelievably great show. Really cool guy who lives in my favorite city in the world, in Austin, Texas. And he's an attorney that helps people cover their assets. And so this show today is really all about how not to get sued and how to protect those precious investments. So you're in for really a just great deep dive amount of education on this show. We're very excited to bring it to you, and we will be right back.
Welcome to the High Return Real Estate Show, the podcast for heavy hitters. 2 men, 1 mission. It's time to build your empire.
Welcome back, everybody. High Return Real Estate Show. Shecky here with my business partner, Jack Gibson. And today we are introducing a really amazing guy named Scott Smith. So he's also a real estate investor, but most importantly, he's an asset protection attorney in Austin, Texas. Guy graduated from Albany Law School, began his career in high-stakes corporate litigation. He learned the key secret he now uses to defeat lawsuits. So you really want to listen up and hear some of the insights that this guy has. So he founded Royal Legal Solutions to offer tax, business, and legal strategies to real estate investors, and spent the last 8 years of his career diving through case law, reading ever-changing tax code, analyzing real estate investment so that you don't have to. Scott's model is very similar to ours in that from a legal standpoint and asset protection, he provides a very done-for-you service, very similar to the way high return real estate works for providing the property to the investor. So I'm so excited about this because the information is extremely congruent to what we do. But again, I mentioned that Scott isn't just a lawyer, he's also a real estate investor himself, and he's got this uncanny ability to make his clients judgment proof. So that's a pretty bold statement, but I want to welcome you, Scott, and we're going to pepper the crap out of you on this judgment proof statement. So happy to have you here, brother.
Yeah, man, great to be here, and I welcome the challenge into what it is. But it's even better than that because the high levels of protection that you're able to achieve for real estate investors with Royal Legal Solutions and what we do also comes at zero extra work on their end. Literally, once people become members of their firm, the only thing they have to do is keep track of their accounting and find the next great deal that they want to get into. We handle everything else for them. So imagine being able to have the Formula One car and somebody else is driving it for you, but you get paid for it. It's just that cool.
Well, it's a great analogy. I love it. So anyway, all right, let's start with the big one. I know that when we were on this conversation, prior to hitting the record button, you had alluded to Jack and myself that there are really top 6 key strategies for really protecting your assets all the way along. And some of these, I don't even know that we've even ever heard of. So I know you're going to illuminate some things for us today, but let's just roll right into it. And I'm just going to let you take over and start rolling through some of these, and we'll just jump in with questions as we feel necessary.
Yeah. So the number one thing that people don't realize that they're really exposed on is that they own assets in their personal name. Now, this is an absolute no-go as a real estate investor. When you own assets in your personal name, you're literally advertising to the world for anybody that wants to sue you. Like you're holding up a big orange sign that says, "Please sue me," because you just told them where all the money's at when they want to come after you, where to get it. So the way to really disincentivize lawsuits and make lawsuits stop before they start is make people think they're not going to get paid for suing you. Right. And there's a couple of ways that we do that. We make it really difficult for them to be able to attack the money at all. The best way to do that from a really high level perspective that everybody needs to be doing as a real estate investor, but also businesses have been knowing about this for years, have all been doing this, is that you always will separate the operations of your business from all of the assets. So that means you have one asset holding company, one LLC or corporation that's going to hold everything in your life. that has any value to it. That's your real estate. It's your stocks. It's your extra cash, anything, right? Then a completely separate company will then be your business entity. It's going to sign the leases for you. It's going to hire contractors. It's going to put their name on contracts just in general. So that way, when there's a lawsuit, who are they going to sue? Well, you didn't sign the lease and the owner of the property didn't sign the lease. It was this other shell company that signed the lease. So that's the one they get to sue because that's where the contract was between, right? The contractor, similarly, only interacted with the shell company. That's the one they get to sue. They don't get to sue the other two that are there. So from just a basic standpoint of what you can put together, it's just a two-company structure like that means that you get a really high level of protection from keeping people from being able to get to your money, which is your asset holding company, or trying to get to you. And a lawsuit against you, of course, even if you don't own anything, can hurt your credit score. So I would say that would be the number one piece as our just a start of where we're going to go with this conversation today. And we have a lot I can tell you about how cool asset holding companies can get with compartmentalizing every asset and hiding all of the ownership.
So Scott, I already have a question. So this is great. So a lot of our investors want to use leverage. So they'll get a traditional, a lot of them do a cash out refinance, and they're only doing one property at a time in most cases. So then they're doing a traditional Fannie Freddie, and those stipulations of the loan don't allow them to put it into an LLC. They have to sign their own name on the closing documents, the purchase agreement, the loan documents, all of that. So what do they do in those situations where they don't really have an option? The loan documents, loan policy doesn't allow them to put that into another asset.
Yeah. So ultimately, we're skipping to the end of the story a little bit, but ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to transfer the property from your name, Jack, into the name of a land trust. And then the land trust is then going to be owned by the LLC. The reason we do that is because a land trust provides anonymity as well as avoids the due on sale clause, which is the restriction that you're referring to in the loan document. And what we tell our clients to do is you always make the money first. So close on that loan in whatever way that you need to be able to get the best financing terms that you have available. Then we're going to do the transfer after the fact into the land trust that's going to avoid the due on sale clause. And then also have the property protected, because we're about making money first and then getting the taxes and the legal in line with that.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question.
Yeah, is a land trust is that very much different than setting up an LLC? I mean, I've never done that before. I don't really know anything about it.
Yeah. So land trusts are really different than LLCs. So land trusts only accomplish anonymity. They don't actually give any protection on their own. Right? I've heard a lot of the lawyers over there bashing land trusts, like, oh, land trusts don't provide any protection. Yeah, duh. We don't ever want them to provide protection. That's why we pair them with an LLC to provide the protection with it. So an LLC is actually a filing that will happen with the state government, the Secretary of State. And there's laws that describe what are the protections that are afforded to people that have an LLC. Now, those laws are strongest in states like Delaware, Texas, Nevada, and Wyoming. States like California, for example, they're basically worthless to be able to have an LLC. A trust, on the other hand, for a land trust is going to be something produced, what's known as the common law, but it's really, in general terms, what you would find online more, it's called a revocable style of trust, right? And revocable trusts don't offer any protection, but what you can do is use a revocable trust to mask the ownership because they're private. So a corporate document has to be public, right? A trust is totally private. There's no filing for it. So when I have a property, I would say that's located at, say, 123 Main Street, and I want to move it into the 123 Main Street Trust, which looks like that's like a transfer to investors. So it kind of clouds title even a little bit more because people looking at that would say, oh, well, it's actually not Jack's property anymore. It looks like he actually sold it to investors in a trust, which is really common. There's no other disclosure on there that links the property back to Jack. It just looks like a blank trust that's attached to an attorney's address. And so that's also then protected by the attorney-client privilege. So at every turn, they're either getting confused because they think, okay, this is a sale to an investors inside of a trust, but we actually can't ask any questions about it because it's tied to an attorney. and the prior owner is not attached to this in any way anymore from any of the public records. Well, this is starting to look like something that I'm not sure about anymore as an attorney looking to pursue Jack. So I'm not going to go ahead and pursue this because I don't think I can get paid on it, right? Or at least I'm making it much more risky for them to get paid and disincentivizing it. But like, have you guys ever heard of like the Series LLC before?
No, I mean, I do mine typically in a personal LLC.
Oh, very cool. And with a personal LLC, are you grouping together multiple properties all in one LLC?
I've done a few, but not all. Like I won't do more than 3 or 4 in any given LLC.
Do you mean where a series LLC where one LLC kind of owns the other LLC and can pull assets out of it if needed?
Yeah, so that's cool, Jack. And Jack, you guys are talking about 2 different ways that you can use LLCs here, right? And both of them are like kind of the old way, right? So all the old garb of attorneys, there's only 2 ways to do it. You would either do what Shecky was doing, where you would say, let's group 3 or 4 properties into one LLC, and we're going to limit our exposure that way. Because then a lawsuit against one property means I only lose those 3 or 4 properties because I can only go after the properties that are in that one LLC. And Jack, what I think you're referring to is a structure that says, well, we'll have one LLC that's the like kind of like the parent, and then there'll be a lot of other sub LLCs that are going to be owned by that parent, which is great. That gives you high levels of compartmentalization of all of the assets. But the problem then is that you actually have to pay for each of those LLCs and all of the maintenance and all the bank accounts and all the yearly fees and all of the compliance for everyone. With a series LLC, you can create it in over 12 different states now. And you can create them, you know, in Texas or Delaware or Nevada, and you can use them anywhere. You know, just like people have been doing with Delaware LLCs for forever, right? You create it in Delaware and you use it everywhere else. We're doing typically the same thing with Texas LLCs because they're cheap and strong. And I do them in Texas, even though I can do them anywhere else because of that reason. But the cool thing about the series is that you can create one company that has one EIN number and one filing. And then what's special about the series is it can create its own what's called child series. So it'll be a child series A, child series B, child series C below it, Jack, just like what you were referring to with your analogy. But the cool part is that each child series you create is free. There's no additional filing for it. So as you scale, you can scale for free. And you have the highest level of protection available, which is better than Shecky's protection. Because Shecky has 4 properties exposed in LLC. All my clients only have 1 property exposed in the LLC. So if they have a lawsuit against property A, they don't lose property B, C, D, et cetera, and it didn't cost them anything to do it. They get it for free, that higher level of protection. And there's all kinds of really cool benefits, Jack, that about with the Series LLC that regarding like banking and how you do the insurance and taxes and all of those pieces. But where do you guys want to go with our next? What kind of, I want to source into what information you guys want to learn about.
Well, I have a quick question. So you alluded to this. I mean, obviously I'm being selfish here, but many of the properties that we are selling to investors that they purchase from us are in Indianapolis. So am I to understand that if, let's say, you set up this Series LLC for one of our investors and that was based in Texas and all of the properties were owned in Indiana, that would be totally fine?
Totally fine. Because all of the properties are going to be owned in Indiana through a land trust. So property A is going to be owned in Land Trust A. They're in Indiana. Land Trust A is owned by Child Series A. Child Series A is then owned by the parent. And it's the same thing from bottom to top with property B. Property B goes to Land Trust B to Child Series B to the parent B. What's super cool about this is that then you can take one Series LLC and then you can own properties anywhere in the United States. And you don't have to pay separate form registration, registered agents, all of this stuff. Why? Because the LLC isn't doing business directly in all of these different states. The land trust is because it owns property. And the land trust is in turn owned by the Series LLC to give it the asset protection. So it's a huge cost savings and with the flexibility of wherever you want to move with it.
Okay, so fantastic, Scott. I mean, I'm sitting here going like, okay, yeah, I mean, Jack and I are pretty seasoned investors, and obviously many of our customers are, and just you being able to say like, well, okay, that's the old way, that's the new way. after hearing what you just said, honestly, I feel like a complete idiot. And
No, it's just that it's like anytime we get new technology, right? Imagine when you went from a flip phone to an iPhone, right? You're like, how did I ever live before?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're giving people. And that's what we specialize in. And that's what I've spent my career, honing in on, is how to do this.
Are there any, the top series LLC, are there any different taxation implications to which state you set up the main series LLC in? Like, in other words, you mentioned a few different states there that are probably more favorable to do this in. Would an investor be better off, say, starting the series LLC in Wyoming versus Texas?
Yeah, so Wyoming doesn't offer a series LLC. There's only 12 states that do. A lot of times you'll hear about Wyoming LLCs because Wyoming has anonymity attached to it, which is great. The thing is that you can create a Texas series LLC and make it anonymous just by having the series LLC owned by a trust. So the same thing that we do to hide the ownership of property, we do that to hide the ownership of the LLC. And that's how you can be able to create the anonymity for free instead of having to pay for a whole new filing in Wyoming and the yearly fees that are associated with that. But regarding the taxation, remember, this is one company with one EIN number and one bank account. And you can keep one bank account as long as you have accurate accounting records for property A, property B, property C, et cetera. The taxes on it is the same as just a single LLC. So if it's a sole member, it's treated as a pass-through and disregarded entity. It's going to be challenged right to the Schedule E of your personal tax return, or a married couple, same thing. Of course, if there's multiple owners to the series LLC, which I have a lot of guys that do syndications will do this, well, then it's just a partnership return, just like you would normally do. So you get to have all of the compartmentalization to be able to create all these LLCs for free, but you only have to do one return still, and you still only have to manage one bank account. As long as you're doing the stuff that you should be doing anyway as an investor, which is I'm keeping track of the income and expenses associated with each property. And that's simply tagging it in QuickBooks or writing into your Excel spreadsheet or just writing down on a piece of paper. The law only says that you have to keep track of it to have an accounting. It doesn't tell you how you have to do it. So whatever way you want to do that is okay.
Get your abacus out, Jack.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
Jack knows me well enough to know that I love simplicity. And dude, I got to tell you, like, this is so freaking awesome. Just the whole simplicity of it with one bank account and the way you've just explained it with structure, like, it just gets me very, very excited. So we know we get into these conversations often with investors, and there's no question that we are going to, I can already see we're going to be referring back to the recording of this podcast many times with those investors, because it's really great information. So can you kind of keep this rolling for us, Scott? And I know there were 4 or 5 other methods that we talked about of protection, and you want to just kind of keep rolling through that?
Yeah.
Hey, before you get into that, what I think probably a burning question on a lot of investors' minds, particularly mine, is what are the most common things that you see real estate investors getting sued for? Like, I'm just trying to think, like, I don't even really know what are the possibilities. And therefore, maybe that we can start thinking about, okay, what can we maybe protect ourselves against if these are the most common things that, are potential threats that we could be, subject to.
Yeah. So I got a quick story for you about that, and this will relate to both. So I actually had a client had the series LLC, and it was actually 2 partners, because each individual child series of a series LLC can have different partnership interests if you want to. They have to get their own EIN number and file a separate tax return for it. But you can think about each child series as if it were its own brand new LLC. You just create it for free. But in one of these partners, what they were doing was doing flips. And so they had a piece of property, acquired the property, ripped out all the plumbing in the bottom of the house, replaced all of it. And then what ended up happening was there was an email exchange between the buyer and the seller regarding what the seller had asked. The buyer had asked, what plumbing underneath the house has been replaced. The buyer responded, all of the plumbing has been replaced. Come to find out 6 months after the sale, that there was a leak in the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom while they were on vacation. Flooded the whole house. It's 6 figures plus in damages to the property.
Wow.
Right? So monster problem. So then that's where we start looking and saying, well, there's a lawsuit that's threatened. I get a letter from the other attorney. That's how all lawsuits start, is by attorneys yelling at each other first. And we were wondering, what to do in this particular situation, because they were basing the claim on the email. As you can imagine, one person said, what plumbing underneath the house has been replaced? The other party replied, all the plumbing has been replaced. They were claiming, you said all the plumbing in the house is replaced and the plumbing that leaked wasn't replaced. I said, well, you have to actually read it in context. And I said, well, we'll find out from a jury. So then you'd actually go through a whole entire court proceeding to see, like, what would a jury think about what these emails were? And, legitimately, a jury hates real estate investors to a large extent, right? Because we're like the greedy, like, business people, and the evil landlords are the person that screwed the other party because they had misrepresented things. There's like a lot of ways that, conniving, litigation attorneys can go after that, right? So that's actually a claim based on fraud, by the way, Jack. Those people aren't dishonest, but the claim is actually called fraud. So fraud is really just misunderstanding. So if you're like, oh, I'm never going to get sued, you really have to say, I don't think anybody's ever going to misunderstand me, which is crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And so that's a very typical type of claim that we handle. Now, in that situation, because they were a client of mine and we used a series LLC for it, remember, we had sold the property 6 months before. So we'd already taken all the money out of that child series. So there's nothing left in that company anymore. So the lawsuit they had was actually against an empty entity. And so what ended up happening in that case, between, the weakness of the claim and the fact that they were suing against a weak entity and they'd have to try to collapse the entire series LLC structure. And I knew, because they were a client of mine, the entity was properly maintained and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, because that's what we do for all of our clients, that they had damn near 0% chance of being able to succeed on that. And so the claim just went away. They just walked away because it was too difficult for them to pursue. And that's ultimately what we want. And that's how litigation really comes out. Now, there's a ton of things, Jack, like that we have that aren't lawsuit based that are like that, because that's one of those types of claims that insurance doesn't cover. But what you'll find in the vast majority of problems that happen in life, insurance does cover it, which I'm always like, yeah, get insurance. Better to be overinsured than underinsured, when it comes into it.
So the client, in your story, they were basically trying to say all of the plumbing in the basement was replaced, not all of the plumbing in the entire house. But they read into it the way they wanted to read into it, that saying you said this, but they really didn't say that.
Right. Yeah. That's 100% it. And that's how, and what you find in law is that most people, and then from my background allegation, most people aren't shady and they're not really fraudsters and shysters that result in lawsuits. Most lawsuits are based on misunderstandings, right? And this is why we have contracts, not because we anticipate the deal going bad. It's because we're saying, well, we anticipate the deal going good, but when it goes bad, like, how much clarity do we want to have about that situation? And that's what lawyers are good at, getting like very clear with the language, because when we talk as, normal people talk, everything is pretty ambiguous, just like in that email conversation. And that's the basis for fraud. So you can't really ever say that I'm never going to get sued for fraud, because that's saying I'm never going to be misunderstood. But what you can do is things like my clients did, which was have the right structures in place that say, even if my worst case scenario happens here, I'm still okay. And in this situation, it worked out really well for him, right?
Love it. Absolutely love it. So I'm just trying to get clarity. You're saying in this case, the client or the suer was not able to collect an insurance claim for a plumbing leak?
Well, there was no insurance, because the allegation was for fraud against my client about the plumbing, right? There might have been an ancillary claim they could have made against their insurance policy, but they were trying to pursue my client directly. And my client's insurance didn't cover it, because insurance only covers negligence claims. But there's hundreds of other types of claims out there that insurance doesn't cover. And then insurance is kind of weak in a lot of ways too, right? Because if the claim is a really high dollar value, like grandma falls to the stairs and she's permanently disabled, now all of a sudden the insurance company denies coverage. We see that on the TV all the time, right? Where claims get really high, insurance denies coverage. And then you're left having to sue your own insurance company. So even when the insurance company would not cover you, that's when your asset holding company would step in. They say, well, even in your worst case scenario, you're only losing that one asset. You're not losing all of your personal stuff, and you're not losing all of your other assets. And I think that's pretty cool.
So so that scenario that you laid out was for, somebody who's like a flipper or buy, a rehabber. What about a normal buy and hold investor? What are some of the dangers that they need to be aware of potential, litigation that you've seen?
Yeah, so I would say that's kind of like that situation where grandma falls through the rotten staircase. So grandma falls through the rotten staircase on your property. You say, great, well, my insurance is going to cover it because that's negligence, which is what insurance covers, accidents, property. Insurance comes back and says, actually, that's a really expensive claim. And because it's a really expensive, well, I can't tell you it's because of, but it really is. Because it's a really expensive claim, what we're going to do is say you knew or should have known that the staircase was rotten and you should have fixed it. So we're not going to cover it because that's called gross negligence. And then all of a sudden, that's when grandma then pursues against you, the property owner, directly. And that's only one scenario, right? It could be around like health issues, like you have mold in your property that you don't know about and there was a tenant there. So now it's an unsafe or hazardous condition, right? There's a ton of different ways that that you can have unknown types of risk that result, especially if it's a property, that you're not seeing, every day. If it's the property right next door to you, probably, a lot of these things maybe aren't a concern to you because you can see it all the time. But if it's something that you're not, having that kind of touch and feel on, I would say, get the good insurance, make sure you're protected with your asset holding companies because, just really compartmentalize stuff down so you don't have to worry about it, right? Ultimately, what you want at the end of the day on all of these issues is for somebody to be able to sue you and for you to really not care, like not interrupt your life at all. And that's what we try to get, as close to that as we possibly can. And that's what I consider being judgment proof, is that, I'm invulnerable to judgments affecting my life.
That's a beautiful place to be. Yeah, that is awesome. All right. So do you want to, I love it, Scott. Will you just keep rolling, man? This is great. Let's go back to some of the other items in the top 6 ways of protecting yourself.
Yeah. So that what we just rolled through right now was all of the pieces about the asset holding company and how you need to have insurance, how you can acquire the property in your personal name and then transfer it into a land trust to avoid the due on sale clause and get anonymity. And of course, everything, with my firm, we take care of all the operational pieces for everybody of how to do all of that. So people can just buy the property, they notify us, we take care of everything from that point forward for them. The only thing they have to do is keep track of their accounting. There's another whole piece that we talked about in the very beginning of the episode, though, which was about your operating company, right? So apart from your asset holding company, which is the series LLC structure, formed in Texas, but you can use it anywhere, regardless of wherever you live and wherever the assets are. You would also want to use the operating shell company as your property management company. And the reason why is because you want that company to be entering into leases on your behalf. You want that company to be hiring contractors and otherwise doing all of the business affairs in your life. Imagine without it first. So if you do it without having an operating company, that means that, Jack is personally doing all of the contracts. He's personally collecting all the rents, right? And signing all of the leases. That means whenever there's anything wrong in any one of those circumstances, Jack gets hauled into court. Now, when Jack gets hauled into court, his first idea is, do I fight it? I pay a lot of money to fight it, or do I settle the claim? The amount of dollars that you're going to be willing to settle the claim for directly depends on what the actual damage is to you. So even if Jack was smart because he compartmentalized all of his assets into an asset holding company and somebody can't actually take any of his money or his assets, Jack still has things that they can hurt him with, like his credit score. Because even if you don't pay the judgment, what happens is it get lodged against your credit score, and then all of a sudden you can't invest like you want to as a real estate investor. So now he has to have the risk. Do I either have the potential of harming my credit score and now I can't make money, right, the way that I want to, or do I pay a settlement that comes into it? And the more risk there is, the higher the settlement dollars go for you. That's just the nature of the business. We've already done a good job of removing all the money. That's when you get a monster settlement because now you have a huge amount of risk if you lose, right? So now we're talking lower settlement dollars because he's only harmed to his credit score. If he has an operating company that he was doing everything through, now there's no chance to harm his credit score because now it's just the only thing that can sue is this shell LLC, which only costs him like $1,000 to be able to get up and running correctly with a good attorney to be able to help him set that up. So now Jack says, what's the cost for me to settle this claim so I don't lose my shell company? And that's never going to be more than $1,000. So even in his worst case scenario, the only thing he's losing is something that would only cost him $1,000 to just start up a new one. And that one can just go away. He can just wind it down. So it really, like, that's a monster piece of be like, now you can't even touch me. I can still run my business. I might lose $1,000, which is, really just kind of like a decent weekend in Vegas, right? So you maybe just skip that trip that quarter. I don't know. Yeah.
You didn't go to Vegas with me a couple of weeks ago, then.
Don't go down that
road. I don't know how you get away with $1,000. Wow.
Yeah. Well,
so
you gotta know people, Jack. Yeah.
So just to get some clarity on this, Scott, I'm for one of our investors, I'm just trying to frame it for them, because we are providing property management, by the way, with a separate company, but it's our company. They don't really have to worry about that. It's like their child LLC, to a certain extent, is doing business with that property management company. Is that the correct setup?
Yeah. So they're already good. They probably, if they have everything already run through a property management company, then they don't need their own operating company for that purpose, for anything they're doing with you guys, because that operating company is, your property management company is already taking on all that liability for them. Right.
Right.
So then all of it is that they would need for y'all stuff is just asset holding company. And then with that asset holding company, what I recommend people doing is putting in their estate plan that integrates with their asset holding company. Have you guys ever talked before about like the importance of using like a living trust for your estate planning when you own real estate?
We have not really gone down that road. I mean, this is, we know so far we've stuck to more, basic stuff and ROI and, what are the common pitfalls and, how to make money basically.
Cool.
So we have you on obviously because we've been wanting to do this deep dive into asset protection. And we've talked to, there was another guy that we spoke with recently that was really great, had a great conversation about investing out of your 401k. And that turned out to be a great episode. And there were some great insights there, just from a standpoint of reduction of taxation. However, the stuff that you're going on, we look at what I effectively call NLS, right? Next level shit. So we really wanted you on the show to be able to do this dive. So just take it away.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So I don't know if I made it clear. We're really a one-stop shop at Royal Legal Solutions, right? So we set up the self-directed IRAs with checkbook control. For California investors, we do really cool stuff using business trusts instead of LLCs to avoid franchise taxes. We do solo 401ks and that kind of stuff as well. But getting back to the estate planning pieces of it, this is what everybody should be doing with their estate plan if you own real estate. Number one is that you structure everything into your asset holding company, right? Use that series LLC structure with the anonymity to provide you that top level of protection that streamlines everything for you and allows your operations to run smoothly no matter how big you get and doesn't increase in cost as you grow. And then what you want to have is that entire asset holding company is owned by something called a living trust. A living trust will avoid probate proceedings. So if you die without a living trust, what happens is all of your stuff gets kicked into a court proceeding where it can get caught up without the ability for people to pay the mortgage, to pay the insurance, to collect rents, and otherwise manage the property. So it can fall in disrepair. So if you care about what happens to your wealth when you die, you have to mitigate those types of risks. And the best way to do that is to use a living trust structure. Because it'll avoid that whole piece of anything getting caught up in a court system. And immediately when you die, somebody else gets to take control of the property for the benefit of whoever you want. And that's all detailed inside of the living trust. What's super neat, and this is like some NLS stuff right here for even estate planners out here that they don't even know about. Whenever I talk to estate planners, is that if you have your living trust own your asset holding company, then all of your assets during your life, when as Jack is buying, selling properties, that happens at the asset holding company level. So he's going to be doing that anyway, as he just lives his life. His estate plan, his living trust up at the top, what it's going to do is just divide the asset holding company. So much to this kid, so much to this kid, so much to, this charity, whatever, right? What that means is like now your living trust is never obsolete because it's only dividing up the company and you're actively managing the company through your life. So there's no extra documentation you have to keep track of throughout the year. So there's nothing that can go obsolete.
So this is probably the dumbest question in the world, but the word that keeps coming to mind here is will. Are you equating the words living trust with a will?
No, two separate things. So a living trust is what you're going to be using to hold all of your assets during your life. And then a completely separate document is what's called a pour over will. So a pour over will is a one-page will that just says anything that I didn't put into my living trust during my life, pour it into the living trust and then distribute it accordingly. Because the idea is there, it's like your catch-all. Like, what do you do with your watches and, your car or your coffee table or your furniture or whatever, stuff that you're not really care that much about because it's not like expensive like your real estate, but you just need some mechanism to put it into the living trust so it can get distributed. But they're two totally separate things, right? And what we do and what I encourage everybody to do is to get like packages of stuff like all together, right? Find what I think that's really great about working with us is that we handle everything from top to bottom for people. So it's everything from like the transfer of the assets into the company. How do you structure the company? How does the estate plan need to work? How is the taxation going to play out for you when you do that? You can always come to one place to help you with all of that. And part of the memberships that we have to the firm allow everybody to have a twice yearly review of their estate plan and their asset holding company. So you don't do boneheaded stuff like pierce the corporate veil, because we advise you on that twice a year on your operations. And we update your estate plan with you twice a year, and then provide continuous and ongoing and unlimited legal support at no other cost from the membership. So it's really one of these pieces of like, that's the level of service you need as a real estate investor to accomplish what you're Shecky and what you're Jack are looking to be able to provide people and saying, offload your concerns of your real estate investments on the things that we do. Here's the investment that you actually need to invest in. And I think that pairs really nicely what we do is saying, and we can take care of all the legal and tax for you guys. So it's it's really great to have this conversation with you guys, because I think that's a cool way of marrying the two. But overall what it is, what I think everybody would need is a series LLC structure, combine that with an estate plan, and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's great. So the clarity that I get out of your distinction between the will and the living trust is the will might have some basic little nagging stuff like, okay, the piano that I got from grandma really needs to go to, my son, right? Like that's where you would define that in the will. And then everything else you could just pour over into the living trust.
Yeah. Because the piano doesn't really have a title attached to it like real estate does. Right. So typically how things work with living trust, to kind of give you guys a deeper dive and how that piece does it work, is that a living trust is just an entity, right? The same way that we do a land trust is essentially the same mechanics of how a living trust works. There's some tweaks into it, but the mechanics is that the only things the trust owns are the things that the trust is actually listed on title as. So if you want your trust to own your primary residence, for example, you can't be the person that's on title for it, right? It'd have to be, the Jack Gibson Living Trust. And now the living trust owns it, and the description of the living trust of how it gets distributed, goes out that way, right? Pianos don't really have that. So you could have some private purchase and sale agreements or something like that, maybe to prove it up to make that happen. But it's not clear cut like it is with, a piece of real estate or a car, right? And so that's typically how we're going to have this catch-all system with the will that goes, either in the will is going to say, I want the piano to go to XYZ person, or it's just listed in the living trust who I want the piano to go to. Because remember, it's going to go from you through the will into the trust. So maybe the trust actually can have everything in it. And you don't actually have to worry even about two documents. You can worry about just one document that automatically updates itself, right, as you change things in and out of the asset holding company.
Love it. Absolutely love it. You are taking something very complex and making it very simple for investors.
Yeah, thanks, Shecky. I worked really hard at this, and
I can see it. I can see you're very passionate about it, and that's great. And I, to a certain extent, I kind of said it at the top of the show, like you have a very similar philosophy to what Jack and I do. It's like we're doing there's a lot of moving parts to what we do. By the time we, acquire and rehab and make sure it's okay and have an inspector come in and, manage it well and do all that stuff. There's a gazillion moving parts. And we make that very, very complex situation very, very simple for investors. And same thing now. I mean, there's, you, to a certain extent, you make it sound very simple, but clearly when you start looking at, parent-child relationships of LLCs and, living wills or living trust versus wills and, how not to pierce the veil, clearly there's plenty of complexity to it that, oh, sure, if somebody really researched it, they could probably figure it out on their own. But man, why would they want to bother when they could just call you?
Yeah. Well, the truth is that attorneys aren't like special. We're not magicians, like anybody can learn everything that I know if they just spend enough time researching it and studying it and get some experience with it. What I always think of is, I might be a business person and a real estate investor first, and then I'm also an attorney. Right. And the way I always look at it is saying is like, what's the highest and best use of my time? Just like how we think of highest and best use of real estate, and let me leverage that, and that's what I encourage everybody to look at is saying, it's a way of saying, let's really focus on the things that we can really be impactful on and dynamic on, and let's offload everything else onto other people. And I got to tell you, I offload a lot onto other people. I got 25 members of the firm here. We got over 1,000 clients across the country. I have to have a big team to help me. And I don't do everything either, right? I have my own team whenever I'm doing syndications or other deals that are out of state that I rely on to help me, to know what are the particularities of that particular deal. So I think it's really important that everybody remember that there is no such thing as like a guru that knows everything, that our real strength is really relying on our networks of people that we can leverage together to be able to have more dynamic movement in our life. And that never stops, no matter how big you get. And in fact, the bigger we get, the more we realize that how much we have to leverage into other people and how important it is that we don't try to do things on our own. But it's really important that we coordinate the right people to work together for us so we can really focus on the things that we know is our highest and best use every day.
Yeah, well said. I'm 100% on board with that. So, are there any components or parts and pieces that we're missing here that we should be covering in regards to, top ways to protect your assets?
Yeah, well, I would just really say that it's important that, there's a lot of different spectrum of where people are at, right? And one of the big questions that we have is this something that I need to do even? And so what I typically tell people is that if you have under $50,000 in equity or, cash, don't worry about it. Because frankly, you're just not a target. Because if it's under $50,000, nobody's really trying to come after you. It's when you start getting over, $100,000 plus that it becomes a no-brainer. Because at that point, now you have enough for another attorney to think that he's going to get paid off of coming after you. And that's what we're really trying to attack by creating all of this defense. If you don't have a lot of money, but you said, hey, I set up some stuff on LegalZoom or, I tried to file it myself, my recommendation for you is if you can't afford to have, we're not talking $10,000 to set this stuff up, by the way, right? You're talking way less than that. But my recommendation, if you don't have a lot of money and you did do some other stuff, is go get a consult with another attorney that you can just pay hourly to look at all of your stuff and sign off on it, or at least to tell you what the current status of it is. You can probably get that done for just a few $100s, right? To really make sure that at least the stuff that you have currently will actually work the way that you think you did. Because what I find a lot is that people will do stuff on LegalZoom and they'll do it on their own and it's really kind of half done, but for not very much more money, they could at least have it done like to the extent that they thought that they did it. And so just have somebody sign off on that. And you'll be in a lot better position than you are if you don't do it at all.
Yeah. And I feel like, look, there's probably plenty of investors listening out there that are either at zero or maybe just one or two properties. Obviously there's so much with much bigger portfolios, but even at one or two properties, just starting out, that's just a fantastic advice because you got a lot to lose. I mean, you went through this whole process to finally make a decision to invest in real estate and, okay, this is a way that I'm going to create wealth and this is the way that I'm going to be able to retire a whole lot better than what I would if I just stayed in my crummy job, that sort of stuff. So what's another $300, $400, $500 to make sure that you've done it right? There's just way too much at stake. So I love that. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think so. And we actually are pretty, flexible. Like a lot of times, we'll be having with you guys, for y'all's listeners in particular, we'll have like a window of time that'll be, after the podcast gets aired, that we'll do like a promotion for everybody to get everybody in that's excited about it, that wants this kind of stuff, but says, hey, I don't know if I can really afford it. So let's bring them in. Let's have like a consultation with them. Let's find out where you're at, where you're growing, right? It's really important because it's not just where you're at. It's where do we plan on being in 3 to 5 years? And let's plan for that. And really trying to get into the advice of what it is that you particularly need. Because these are the overall structures that we've gone over today. They're the biggest, best, scalable types of models. But a seasoned attorney or a seasoned staff aren't just going to have a one size fits all, right? Because it doesn't work that way. It really works to everybody's particular situation. And that's why it pays to have somebody that's an attorney that's also a real estate investor, just like your CPA. You want your CPA to also be a real estate investor. If they're going to be advising you on those types of issues, you should always hire professionals that are in the same line of business you are, if you ever can, because they're just going to know a lot more. And I always do that. That's the rule that I live by anyway.
Yeah, it's great. My favorite question, are there any questions that we did not ask that we should be asking?
Yeah, so there's one drawback to the series LLC, or maybe two. So the one drawback is that you're never going to want to finance inside of the institution itself. So you always want to be financing outside of the entity and then bring it in, right? Because the conforming loans and other financing institutions aren't going to like looking at a trust and series LLC combination. They're going to look at that and be like, whoa, this is going to be a huge underwriting bill. That freaks us out. Cool. Well, let's bounce it out. We'll do the refinancing. We'll bring it back in. We're going to bring it back into a land trust to avoid the due on sale clause, totally circumvent all of those problems. The second major thing about a series LLC is that you'll find, even though it's been around for over 20 years, there's not a lot of case law on it. In fact, there's zero case law that really impacts what's going on with the series LLC directly. And that for a lot of people, they say, well, that tells us that we can't be sure about the entity itself. I take the opposite approach. I say, well, actually, series LLCs have been involved in thousands of lawsuits. And among those thousands of lawsuits where it could be challenged and the attorney that's there litigating the case could get a huge payday if they could collapse the structure, nobody's tried to do it. What that tells me is that there's nothing there to challenge over the course of the last 20 years. And so there's not going to be a challenge because challenges are very expensive to be able to create that case law. Low probability, no probability of winning. You're just not going to see it.
That's awesome. I guess, obviously we live in an incredibly litigious society. And, there's kind of been an underlying conversation going on between the words of this episode about how people are motivated by money. If they can pierce the veil, if you used 50,000 kind of as a benchmark, until the other side realizes that there's nothing to go after, they're going after you, whether they're right in doing that or not. I mean, they're just going to go after the cash, and it's unfortunate that we live in a society like that. The interesting thing to me is, if you're saying there's really no stats or there's no history of this series LLC being pierced, that's a phenomenal stat. So, I look at that and go, okay, why the heck is the whole American public not aware of this? Why are we not aware of this? Like, this is just so juicy.
Yeah, and what you're going to find in the short term, that there's already legislation being passed that it's going to become national, right? So what happened historically is that it used to be like 40 plus years ago, right? That everybody was doing limited partnerships, right? And then Delaware created what's known as an LLC. Then LLCs became the standard. Now we're at a point where series LLCs are on the cusp becoming the new standard across the country, right? Or just happen to be ahead of the curve of what's going on. So that's. You should expect that, right? Anytime that anybody's ahead of the curve, not everybody knows about it. That's why it's ahead of the curve. And it's really, really impactful, right? Because I've seen investors that personally have, assets. They're well insured. They had all the assets in their own name, and got wiped out I know one guy that got wiped out for over $3 million from a single lawsuit. And the stats are really scary for investors in the sense that if you're looking at lifetime planning for what needs to happen, is that over a 20-year period, there's a 95% chance you're going to be involved in a major lawsuit, but you just don't know when that's going to happen. And the only thing you can do is be proactive about it to know that you're going to be in the best possible position when that does happen. And that's really what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to say, let's put people in the best possible position. Let's hide all the assets. So it looks like anybody trying to sue you doesn't look like there's anything there for them to go after. So they don't even start the process of really coming after you. And this will be the new norm, as that you'll see in the next couple of years, as, you know, guys like myself and a few of us across the country that are beating the drum of like, okay, guys, let's get up to speed, which is, and the attorney speak, it's only 20 years old, which means it's brand new, right? For some reason, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I'm with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like this has the potential, assuming it stays in place in its current sort of legislative shell, to perhaps turn the tide in America, hopefully moving away from being such a crazy litigious society, because just the economic burden to people for living in that kind of society is stupid. It's ridiculous. And I think we've gotten over the top with that stuff. So if this has the opportunity to turn the tide on that a little bit, then I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to happen one individual at a time on turning the tide. I think, you know, it's one person signing up to get the stuff, and then eventually, you know, everybody's going to be jumping on board for it. You know, you'll see that a lot with litigation too, that it's going to spike anytime there's a downturn in the economy as well, right? Once people are stop making money on their own, then litigation takes a huge spike. So some of my investors that I get talk to me about saying, hey, you know, I think there's going to be another downturn somewhere up the line. We don't know when that's going to happen. You know, and they say, this is why we're going to get asset protection, because we're really worried about the amount of litigation that exists in our society, and we don't want to have to worry about that. So, you know, there's good reasons to think that we should, you know, invest, that I personally invest in peace of mind. I don't know if you've ever been involved in a lawsuit, but the lawsuits that I've helped my clients with and have been things that really you can see people age, you know, because the risk that they're facing is that they're completely under attack. And we're just not very well equipped as, you know, Homo sapiens, but we're under attack to not have huge amounts of stress levels continually. And so that's really what we're trying to do, I think. And that's really the core values that I really hold up, is saying, let's live a better life. The way to live a better life is to have more peace. The way to have more peace is to be able to mitigate threats. And so let's wipe out all of the threat piece, so then we can be more at peace to focus on the things we want to do, and we'll have a better life by proxy. At least I hope that's true, because this is my entire life is working on this stuff, and that's what I'm trying to give people. So I'm really hoping that's true and it works that way.
That's beautiful, brother. Well said. Yeah, obviously anybody that's ever gone through any kind of litigation is, you know, really resonating with what you just said. And, you know, Jack and I certainly are not immune to it. So, you know, we've had our share of little fun, and it's never not stressful. And, you know, especially as an investor, you say, well, God, everything I worked my ass off for to get to this point, right, is now there's an opportunity for this to be taken away from me. It's the one of the most horrific feelings in the world. You know, it's so yeah, anything that you can do to insulate from that situation, I think is absolutely fantastic, and really should be a top priority for any investor. You know, whether it's our kind of investing or anything that you're doing, this is, I think, a top priority. So I'm super glad you've come on the show. Were there any other? I want to ask you. You hinted at a little benefit or special you want to do for our listeners, so I'm gonna ask you about that. But is there anything else from a procedural standpoint, or anything that we should be covering that we didn't really cover to illuminate any good strategies?
Yeah, so I think that the key strategies that you want to look at, whether it's, you know, with what we're doing, you know, here at Royal Legal Solutions, or just any of the thousands of people that say that they practice asset protection, is you got to be thinking about three different things. One is upfront costs, your ongoing costs, as well as operational costs. And operational costs are the things that are like the time leeches for you, right? Like, what are the things that you actually have to end up spending all of your time like worrying about or making sure that you do, twice a year, 3 times a year, every time you make another action. We've tried to target all three of those by having, a very competitive like costs up front, really low ongoing costs associated with, maintain all of the corporate structure for people, as well as providing continuous, unlimited, and ongoing legal support after the fact, which I don't know anybody else that really even does that, to be able to hold people's hand through any problem that they have with the real estate as it relates to their company as they move forward, and offloads all of the operational concerns. Because the only thing our investors and our members have to do is find the properties they want, notify us after the fact we move it, and keep track of their accounting, which they have to do anyway to be good investors. And we take care of everything else for them. So, but whatever system you're looking at, right? Even if it's, not ours, right? I encourage you, find all the good information that you want out there on, there's a lot of, smart people that are doing this stuff. I think that we're the best, but of course, educate yourself. But those are the three main ways that I would analyze it, to be able to look at it.
Cool. Jack, you got anything else you want to throw in?
That's great. I think we probably better cut it off right there before we overload all of our listeners.
I'm already on overload. So tell us about this little juicy tidbit you threw out there of what you could do for our listeners.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is for anybody that's going to be coming in from the podcast, what we're going to do is go ahead and offer anybody that contacts us in the first month after publication, 3 months free of our legal concierge service. So that's going to be that continuous, unlimited, ongoing legal support that I was referencing. So that way you can get used to what that's like to not have to look online or to some shady forum. You come straight to a professional and be able to get your questions answered. With that, we also offer personalized half-hour consultations for $150 for people that are wanting that kind of support. And of course, from that consultation, we're able to provide a number of different solutions for you that you can pick from that are going to make sense for both what your goals are and what you want to do, and also your risk tolerance, right? Those are the two main pieces that we do with that. So I'd like to be able to offer that to everybody. Come in, contact us and get the feel of what that's like to actually have a real support team behind you to answer all of your questions from professionals that are experienced in the industry that you're working with. You'll love it. It'll be the greatest thing you ever did.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that. That's really, really, really great. So how do people find you and get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can either come to the website, which is royallegalsolutions.com. You can call us up, 512-757-3994, or feel free to email me directly at Scott, SCOTT, at royallegalsolutions.com. And, we're also on Facebook and all the social media. They're great ways to be able to connect with us there. We have a YouTube channel. We're launching the Real Estate Nerds podcast on September 1st. If you guys are looking to see what it is to look at, not just the deal itself behind real estate, but the people behind it and what they do or did that made them either their best deals or their worst deals. And we're doing a deep dive into some really amazing real estate investors sharing their stories and the really dirty laundry, of their past and where they went wrong with it and how they got, how they turned the ship around, which I think is really, really cool. So, yeah, I'd say just go ahead and if you reach out, we'll connect you up with whatever you're interested in. We have a ton of different ways for people to get information, on whatever level they're looking for.
That is awesome. Well, brother, I want to just thank you so much for your wisdom, your knowledge, your passion, your great way to communicate and taking some of this complex stuff and making it more understandable. This has really been just an amazing show. And so, we're both incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to come on and share your good stuff with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I mean, I love coming on and sharing with people. I'm really an educator at heart. for everything that I do. And I think everything that with Royal Legal Solutions is geared around that. That's one of our core things that we like to do. We just know that the more educated everybody is, and the more people are listening to great podcasts like yours, and like Real Estate Nerds, that the better decisions everybody's going to be making. And, when we rise individually, we pull everybody else with us. So, the way I look at it is that we're all in this together, at some form or fashion. So the more we can help each other, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you again, Jack, as well. Thank you. Always appreciate your help and insights. And that is a wrap.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great episode. I think we're going to be referring people back to this one for quite some time, Shecky.
Yeah, I think so. Again, thank you, Scott. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon.